Hi, everybody. You are listening and watching to the Green Heiress Retreats podcast. I'm Susan Amoros, and I have with me today in the studio a very special guest, Brandon McIlroy. Brandon, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Yes.
Thank you so much for being here and taking the time. We wanted to make a special effort, Erica McIlroy and I, who happens to be
My mother, yeah.
exactly, to ensure that we're able to bring in as many facets of wellness journeys and to speak from both sides, both practitioners, offering various modalities, and people who have either studied those modalities or have benefited from them. And we also, in particular, wanted to include what we consider the most recent generation's experiences, because that's so powerful. And it really sets the tone and foundation for the future and a lot of what we do. So, with all of that said, Brandon, would you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Okay. So my name is Brandon McIlroy. I am 23 years old. I've grown up most of my life here in Pittsburgh, and I've gotten to know Susan and everyone at Green Heiress for probably the past like 7 years or so. And I would describe myself as being interested in philosophies, spiritual concepts, sports activities, yoga. I watch YouTube of different people like Rupert Spira and read books like The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And I just would overall describe myself as someone that's curious about the nature of existence.
Thank you so much, Brandon. That was a wonderful breadth, and it offered everybody in the audience, I'm sure, a sense of your depth. And at a tender age, you certainly are probably one of the most philosophically oriented people I know. I'm proud and very privileged to have you as a student who has been training with me in one form or another for most of these 7 years. So I know you a little from that side of things. And I thought maybe we could explore a little bit of that further. And you could share from your perspective, going back to your mid-teens, what really compelled you toward what we would just call a more holistic understanding of yourself and the world about you.
Yeah. Well, I remember originally when I started coming here when I was young, and meeting with Susan and learning about qigong and energy. And I remember holding a necklace out and letting it drop and just seeing if the power of the movement of my own mind, if that could direct the motion of this activity, and being able to see how directly the activity of this world out here is affected by what's going on inside here. I started to realize that what I choose to focus on and believe in will make its cause and effect in reality. So I thought that was a really cool demonstration that got me intrigued, kind of like Kung Fu Panda with
Yes.
yeah.
So much so, right? Kung Fu Panda, Pokemon, and we've got a lot of great from the Far East here coming in that are part of our pop culture, but they come from millennial old practices and understandings. And I remember that day like yesterday that you talk about, and that really kind of brings us to that larger conversation about our role, because we are such sentient, sophisticated beings. We are able to be aware that we have an impact, that we have an effect, we can be part of any causal reality. Can you tell me a little bit about how that struck you at a tender age and how you've worked with that on your path going forward?
I would say that in a weird way, it almost made me more graceful in my own movements. And
Mm.
I kind of started to see my body as an instrument of vibrations and frequencies, and the way that I would even hold my posture, or even when I would start learning qigong and there were specific moves, but even when I would go to grab my orange juice at the table, I
Mm.
would start to move my hand more gracefully. So I
Yeah.
would say that it added an element of gracefulness to my body language and perception of how I move my body. Well, the more eloquently and
Mhm.
fluid that you move your body represents how fluid and open your spirit is.
It really is as though you were beginning to consciously align your body and mind with your spirit.
Yeah, yeah.
And tell me a little bit about how that journey in integration of those parts, um, where that takes you in your daily life.
Yeah, I would say that I would describe it as like dropping into beingness. And I remember even when you came over to have a session with me one time, and I was walking towards you and I was getting out of bed. I remember there was this very natural state of a fully embodied experience while I was walking to the session that I was able to hold with me during it. And it kind of just felt like as if there was like a tender beingness to my whole body for whatever reason, when I was being able to drop into that beingness, there was this slight subtle buzzingness to the presence. I was starting to I you would always used to sense other people's presence and the presence of other objects, but I started to
Right.
notice the presence of my own self. And when I started to notice my own presence, it started to become like something that I could draw my attention to anytime and it would always be there. And it was something that it was almost like an impersonal relationship with what I am.
That's an incredible observation to and an experience to have held. And it requires presence. It also sounds very power filled.
Yeah. Yeah.
What would the world be like, in your opinion, if everyone was at center with their power in that way you describe?
People might seem a little bit excited just to even be walking or
I
breathing.
love that.
Yeah, I would say there would be I just think that if people were embodied into that presence while they moved around, moments that would otherwise seemingly pass by would start to reveal a sacredness to them.
No, that's really beautiful. I know that recently, after being a long time fan, and I would call you an aficionado of Eckhart Tolle, uh, talk to me a little bit about what it was like to actually be live and present with one of your many teachers.
Yeah, this was only like 2 weeks ago, and I got to see Eckhart Tolle. Um, Only 4 rows from him, got to see him, and I would say not only was his speech very nice, but his degree of presence and stillness, and there was no he did not strength he had a way of having a humor about his own self-image, and kind of described that humans in general are on this playing field where they're presenting self-images,
Mm.
whether it be social media, personality in person, and he was able to make fun of his own self-image in a way that kind of was able to then look at yourself and not take yourself as seriously.
Oh, that's really wonderful. It's a great message for anyone at any time of life. Would you say that being in the presence of that kind of energy, does that impact your plans in terms of your further self-cultivation?
It kind of, to me, when you find presence, there's a satisfaction, and it kind of takes away the whole paradigm of feeling like you are striving to get somewhere, but more happily to be where you are in the process. And just noticing that even small interactions with people or ordering a coffee, or
Mm.
when you are embodied into the state of presence and you're not overthinking, it starts to deepen um, ordinary things. And it just seems like whether I'm creating a business idea or just petting my dog Leo, that teaching will always be of value.
I imagine, especially for your generation, that a sort of stylized and highly edited version of reality has been part of the external stimulation of your life. And it can't help but impact all of us, but I would say particularly those who are in their 20s and younger. And here you are really talking about subtle moments, um, profundity that
Mm-hmm.
comes from what's the mundane
Mm-hmm.
and an interaction. Can you tell me what you do to offset the impact of what we would just say our digital age has had?
I personally, when I present myself in that image of social media, I self-deprecate or am goofy, or I don't personally take myself as seriously to express myself, to allow other people to be like, oh, well, this guy has the comfortability to just share his notes on Instagram or just be goofy, because um, I see when I first started even expressing my thoughts on social media, it was very vulnerable of me.
Mm-hmm.
And I would always say that the first bold thing that you do out of your comfort zone is always going to be the hardest, but that what was at first out of your comfort zone, when you continue doing it, will no longer even affect you that much.
You bring up such a great point. There's so much power by leading with your vulnerability.
Mhm.
And as you say, once you strike out in that direction, um, you can't help but feel, I'm sure, even a greater sense of satisfaction.
Yeah. Yeah. Willing to be, what it's kind of almost as if your self-image starts to evaporate and it starts to become more malleable, and you're not attached to a certain image, and it starts to be able to express, and your
Hmm.
appearance can appear to however it likes freely. It kind of seems like there's more of a spontaneousness out of your nature when you are embodying the presence and allowing yourself to be perceived, whether that anytime you allow yourself to be perceived, it is vulnerable, and even perceiving yourself can be vulnerable. But
So true.
yeah, yeah.
That's really beautiful. What do you think people resist most about a flow state as you describe? Because what I'm hearing in a word, you're talking about um, a reciprocal relationship with anyone or any environment.
Hmm.
You're plugging in and opening, and you're hoping others will do the same. But what do you think feels almost dangerous to many people about that kind of fluid connection state?
Hmm. I would say it's because of the power behind it in that state of why if if I were to be in front of a crowd of 50 people and someone said, "Oh, you got to sing in front of them," I could have a heart attack about that. But if someone says, "Only focus your attention on the vibration and sound of your voice while singing is happening," and I could channel all of my attention into that one sound where I'm no longer singing in front of 50 people, but
Mhm.
the experience of singing is happening freely. And it shows me the power of I have anytime I get angry, anytime I get nervous or make a decision to speak to someone, at the end of the day, I'm the one that gives meaning to the conversation. If someone tells me anything, it has to go through my brain before their compliment or insult gets interpreted. And when you start realizing that you're playing a game with your own mind, when you're interacting with people, you're almost interacting with your own mind to even be able to interact with them. Um,
Mhm.
I noticed that when I started to see things like that, my brain or my thought process started quickly went from a anxiety type of person to a comedian type of person. So I might be in silence noticing myself laugh.
Mhm.
And it was just interesting seeing how my brain interacts with my brain.
I love that.
Hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit about how your heart and your intuition have come to interact with your brain?
I would say with heart, um, I would say it's almost like something that is inconceivable to the mind. And anytime I drop into the heart, I'm only left with the silence and a stillness and a peace for what is here now in this presence in this moment, however it manifests itself. But it definitely seems like, as I think there's a quote in the Bible, the peace that surpasses all understandings, because it's not something that is a mental concept, but is a direct presence that is kind of like an infinite potentiality. And out of that empty, infinite potentiality gives rise to everything. But when you drop into the source that your mind can sort of evaporate into, kind of like your mind evaporates into the love that it longs for. And when it's no longer searching for anything out there in the realm of mind, it evaporates into its own source. And by default, in its evaporation, the separate self kind of loses itself, kind of like the moth to a flame. The second it reaches the light, it dies into the light and becomes the light.
That's really beautiful. And how about your intuitive self?
I just think that with intuition, I think the more that you can relate to another human being from a loving, authentic way, you start to bring that out of people.
I think the same.
And the way you change your relationship with yourself, change your relationship with everyone else, because you bring out of people what you're bringing out of yourself.
How would you recommend that anyone listening to this right now could use their mind to support their heart and their intuitive intelligence?
Hmm.
Because I think that's probably one of the greatest challenges
Mhm.
when the brain takes over and starts to overcome these other incredibly powerful logic defying centers that we have as humans.
Yeah. If you're, I would say to be so present with your mind that you're actually witnessing the spontaneousness of your own mind's activity as opposed to claiming ownership of it before it even arised. And when you're that present with it, the
Mm.
voice of your mind will no longer be something taken for granted, but a direct present experience to equally listen to the words coming out of my mouth as if you're listening to the words coming out of my mouth. So there's never an assumption that uh taking for granted because every direct experience is absolutely spontaneous and fresh.
Along with the flow practice of Qigong, can you share a little bit about some of your other practices? They may be things you do daily, they may be things that are occasional, but to give some examples of what you've evolved to, Brandon, in terms of what you would call um, your practice, your personal
Mm-hmm.
practice.
Yeah. Naturally, when people are tired, they yawn, they put their hands over their head. There's different movements that you can do with your body to readjust your homeostasis. And I would say that when I'm about to yawn or stretch or move my arms, there's just more of a awareness that this isn't just a random bodily thing. This is something that's very powerful. So I try when I notice my body naturally seeking to readjust itself or express itself in any ways, I just like to kind of get into the flow of it and play around with it and focus on my breath as well during it.
I think that's a great thing that you bring up is you like to have some fun with
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's something people forget. As
Hmm.
humans, we look at it a little more as a task or work or have to.
Hmm.
Where do
Hmm.
you see yourself going in terms of perhaps a professional expression of these passions? Talk a little bit about where you are with all of that, although we all understand you're 23 and there's a big road before you.
Hmm. Well, I am open to any opportunities, and I haven't really actively been saying, what do I want to specifically do with what we're talking about or talking about the nature of consciousness. But anytime I ever see any person that even gives an ounce of interest in the topic, then my eyes are lit up. And I write and express it on Instagram. And I'm open to making a YouTube channel, potentially doing more Qigong with my friends and introducing more people to the movement. But I'd say I'm in a work of progress right now, trying to give it more momentum.
That's fantastic. Um, how do you find that you relate to something that you brought into this conversation very early on? How do you find that you relate to resistance now versus before this journey of heightened awareness or enlightenment began for you?
Well, if you ever seen a deck of cards and you would think the king or the queen is the most powerful, and then you see that there's the Joker card, and the Joker doesn't win the game, but it kind of just ruins the whole game by being out of the matrix per se.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that before this awareness, or whatever you want to call it, there was a strivingness to find peace and find happiness. There was an eagerness to be free from these resistant feelings because
Mm-hmm.
there's feelings that I didn't want to have that were there. And I would say that the Joker card kind of feels like you're giving permission to all these feelings play with themselves and themselves. And when you strip away the ownership of the feelings
Mm-hmm.
to more as a loving present witness of them, their meaning and the source of these emotions start to ultimately subside back into the source that it appeared from in the first place, as opposed to endlessly searching for peace. You realize that your presence is the peace that these unwanted feelings are searching for. And the moment you stop trying to feel like you're the emotions searching to peace and realize yourself as the peace that these emotions are exploring within, it will return to your own essence and your own home of peace.
That's an incredibly important insight, and I think a message for our times when people are dealing with uncertainty and so much variability, a lot of fear states. Um, can you give us a little information on how you see the best way where you're sitting now today to grapple with that for your generation?
For I guess if I had to say, if you really wanted to have an ultimate ease and peace, you would have to wrestle with the things that are knocking on your door. And what was knocking on my door was just the concept of mortality and death, and what do I believe in, and religion. And I the more I got into peace and acceptance
Mm-hmm.
of my own existence and realizing how precious it is, and the more I came to a full acceptance of death, that's when I started to truly feel like I was living more freely. And if I ever get caught up in my head, it might sound negative to say to a lot of people, but if I notice myself too shy to speak to someone or anything, I realize, Brandon, this existence is precious. It's this heart is still beating itself. This will go away. And I know that what I am is bigger than this, but
Mm-hmm.
I am not going to, I am way bigger than a person, and everybody's way bigger than a person. And if you know yourself as something that can't be conceptualized into a form, then your expression of your form will be an expression of the infinite formless, as opposed to feeling like you are just a separate self perceiving the universe. It might feel like you're the whole universe perceiving a separate self.
I think that that's beautiful as well as profound. The oneness message is really important, and yet we live with the illusion of separation.
Yeah. Yeah. That is interesting how if everything was one infinite, indivisible reality expressing itself to experience separateness, you could almost look at it as one alone loving being giving itself the appearance of loneliness and separation only for the pure joy and experience itself, experiencing itself through us. And when I look at you, you're a separate object floating in space per se. But when I'm able to look at you and the activity of myself looking at you speaking equally synonymously as within the field of consciousness, I'm no longer the person speaking to you. I'm just an indivisible awareness that
Mm-hmm.
is observing this. And when I'm in that state, it feels as if a lot of people would feel like we are having two awarenesses observing one objective room. But what I'm saying is it feels like one awareness simultaneously experiencing two intersubjective realities. And when I can experience my intersubjective reality as a mere witness and not fully identified with the form, our connectivity is not the world that we share, but the consciousness that we are that gives the appearance of world.
That's really amazing. Just to be able to follow that, I think is a lovely little avenue that you've taken us down here, but it is incredibly deep as well. For people who are relatively nascent, they're new on the journey of self-awareness. They may understand themselves as having a need to heal something or to just elevate their experience. What are some thoughts or recommendations you have for those who are thinking about putting a toe on the path?
Hmm. I I have a thing that I do where I'll kneel on the ground and on kind of on my hands and knees and just being, and I'll just, whether you want to say, God, let your presence touch me, or just really, really examine your own existence. Um, I would say when you slow everything down and you kind of taste that there's this love, there's a source of love that has an infinite supply within you that is radiating to your own life existence. And you can build a relationship with what is beating your heart and breathing your lungs. And you start to develop a dialogue with this presence, this life being force. It will almost feel like everything will turn into that. The chair that I stare at will just be an expression of this life force that is loving me. And it becomes this relationship that never will lose you once you get a connection. When you can actually build that connection within and recognize your own existence as that direct experience, then things start getting exciting.
It's a beautiful way to sort of step forward and assert yourself with your environment and lead that connection to become something that supports you. That's beautiful. Brandon, where can people find you on social media?
My Instagram is Brando Mac, Brandon McIlroy. If you type in the username, I'm going to be starting a YouTube channel called Brando Mac on the Track. So I'll be starting that soon.
That's fantastic. And it's very easy to remember too.
Brando Mac on the Track. Yeah. It rings a little bell. So that would be, yeah. And I have a lot of writings to read on the Instagram.
Brandon, this has been a real joy and a privilege. And on behalf of Erica, myself, and the podcast Original Bliss, and most of all, Green Heiress, we thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Susan. This is great.